You have a grand gift for silence, Watson. It makes you an invaluable companion. I'm Chris Spivey.
And I'm Eddie Webb.
And today on Genreless, we're here to talk about the original, the one, the only Tony Stark. My favorite part about our note sheet is there's a bit up here where we even have the top where we kind of say our names in case for some reason like we get distracted by a car going by,
Right.
a random thought or notion, a joke that Eddie wants to make. I have gotten to the point now where I no longer fill that in because the last line is like we kind of say what the show is or whatever, and then we go
Right.
into it. It is more fun now for me to leave that blank and see Eddie's face whenever I do it normally or when I pull something out of the hat. Drops.
Mostly, I'm just shaking my head because for those of you who can't see me, I am shaking my head at Chris right now. Not because of the joke, because that happens, but more it's clearly you're coming in hot for this movie, and I think we're going to have an interesting discussion about Sherlock Holmes 2009, which is what
I
we're actually
off
talking about
the
today.
bat want to say that I enjoy 70% of Guy Ritchie's work.
What's 30% you don't like?
I know people love Snatch. I didn't really love Snatch. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't. I think he made a movie with Madonna. Not really my thing either. The Aladdin movie that he made with Will Smith was all right. So I'm very much a hit or miss Guy Ritchie kind of person. I still love Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. I think I'm one of the 8 people that do, but I love that movie.
I mean, and it's a good easy way in because like Guy Ritchie is certainly a very I don't want to say controversial because it's not the word I'm looking for. Marmite is probably the better word. Some people love him, some people hate him, and what they love and hate is pretty distinctive to many people. He's a bit like Michael Bay in that regard. I generally
I would
don't like Michael Bay films, but there are a few that I have found reluctantly that I have enjoyed.
I would love to see a Guy Ritchie Transformers movie. Transformers fighting in slow mo with like oil
Yes,
pouring out of their faces when they get hit.
yes, that would be awesome. I would love that.
Uh if only this was a visual podcast, people could see the many moves that I make and like as I visually showed Eddie what oil coming out of a Transformer's face would look like.
I'm sure people got the got the gist of that.
I am a game master and I am prepping to run 4 games this month, so I gotta
Jesus
get
Christ.
in the zone. Well, all right. So digression already. That shows you how much I want to talk about this movie.
Clearly you don't.
I am currently set to run 6 or 7 campaigns this year,
Yikes.
and most of them start this month, and they're going over. 2 of which are about redacted, and so I've got playtesters. I've got all their
Love
characters
redacted.
ready, and we've done a session 0 about redacted, and they're super redacted about amazing redacted things. As I said, I'm running a whole bunch of games,
Uh-huh.
one of which is going to be a Star Trek second edition that I'm excited about running Star Trek because I've never run Star Trek. I've always been more of a Star Wars person. And I've got the new PDF for the second edition, but I'm still on the fence about the whole 2D20 system. I've run some Fallout and it was kind of fun. I've read Conan, which was interesting. So I'm iffy.
Yeah. I haven't run Star Trek since the Faza system back in the 80s, so
You're missing the premium book from the 90s. It was like Next Generation, Deep Space Nine. It's not
Oh
Fawcett.
no,
It's
you're
somebody
right.
else.
You're right. I take it back. I did run Last Unicorn like once. The next gen book.
See, look at that.
Yeah.
Do you know that I've actually run the 1970s Fawcett Doctor Who book a couple times?
I ran it once, like when it first came out. But yeah, it's not a good system. At all.
All of that to bring it back to Sherlock Holmes,
Somehow.
both as British icons who could be played by Robert Downey Jr.
You, I suppose Dr. Little could be seen as kind of a attempt at playing Doctor Who.
Yep. Look at that. I didn't even have to finish that joke. We've done this so long.
Because I was about to say what, and then I was like, oh, actually, no, I could see Dr. Little. I can see that. I can see that logic.
both with questionable accents.
Right.
Although, having read some of the initial interviews and stuff with Robert Downey Jr., he believed that his work on Chaplin prepared him for the role of Holmes with the accent.
So yeah, I guess we should start there then. I mean, I
We can go back to Richie if you want to, but I figure we need to go ahead and
no, no,
address
no. Like
Tony Stark in
I
the
gave
room.
Carl Urban a lot of stick for his accent for Butcher in The Boys, and
Butcha.
this is better? Question mark. Um, but no, it's not good. His accent's not good.
Okay, I'll reel in my thoughts on the movie and will not make them quite as pronounced now that people know what they are. How did you enjoy, before we get into the movie, the casting of RDJ as Holmes? Do you remember when it happened way back in the day? What your first thoughts were
Uh,
before you saw it?
my first thoughts were what the fuck, right? Um, uh, and not necessarily because an American's playing Sherlock Holmes. That's not necessarily the problem, but I was to me it was so close after Iron Man, and I was like, oh, he's just gonna play Tony Stark, and he kind of did, but there was more to it than I expected. I went into this movie expecting when I first saw it, I was like, I'm not gonna like it, but it is uh, to a larger point I'll make later, but like it's the first Holmes film in a good long time in the U.S. So it's like I'm gonna go watch to support it. Um, and I walked away enjoying it better than I thought I would. It does not change the fact that I still feel like Guy Ritchie saw Iron Man and said, "Oh, well, basically that's Sherlock Holmes."
What I remember reading is that Downey Jr. was in some executives' offices with his wife, and that's when the script sort of came up, and he expressed interest,
Mhm.
and they foisted Downey on Richie, who was like envisioning a younger Sherlock Holmes,
Okay.
so he could have like that growing arc and curve, which is likely the show because I think Guy Ritchie's getting ready to make a Sherlock Holmes TV
Yes.
show with a younger lead, and I think that is probably more the vision he originally had than this movie.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if this is the official title, but it is being shopped around as Young Sherlock Holmes as the title for the show. So
I could have sworn that show already existed by was it Lucas from the 80s?
no, you're thinking of Young Indiana Jones.
There is a young
There
Sherlock
is
Holmes.
there's Sherlock Holmes movie that
All
came out in the
right.
80s.
Okay.
So you're not entirely wrong, but it wasn't ever a TV show.
So I would get 50% on my test. Not bad.
In
Not bad.
fact,
Not
I
great.
will
Not bad.
say, remember this thought when we talk again next week. Put a pin in that.
Oh god. So with Downey Jr. in the role, he sort of dictated the other main cast members of the movie. Like he had a meeting with Jude
Yep.
Law and liked Jude Law and thought they'd have good chemistry. So that's why Jude Law gets to become
Right.
Watson. And he's also the person that sort of handpicked Rachel McAdams to be Irina Adler. I'll have thoughts about that later.
Yes, because somebody else was actually in contention for that role, and then was trying to be Jude Law's ex-fiance. And so when she found out he was attached to the project, she left, withdrew.
Do you know who that was?
Off
I
the top of
don't
my
know
head,
who
no, I
that
don't.
was.
But I do know that you're right. A lot of the casting was shaped around Downey Jr. being on board.
Which, having learned that now, I am not as keen on that because I would have liked to have seen the alternate version.
Right. Right. Um, so I mean, okay, now let's take a step back. One of the reasons why I think this movie is worth defending and is good is in the sense that we talked how the 90s were dire, right? We had some thoughts last
Yeah.
week. And as far as US film distributors were concerned, Sherlock Holmes was poison. Uh, this basically the last movie before the 2009 Sherlock Holmes film that followed Sherlock Holmes in the US was Without a Clue by Michael Caine in 1988, which was a comedy about Sherlock Holmes. And that also bombed in the US at least. So a lot of this was Guy Ritchie saying, "Okay, I'm willing to come on board because I have a certain cachet in the US and in Europe as a director. So I can get both markets on board with the Sherlock Holmes film." But he had certain conditions. He's not a writer. He's actually one of the films that he's not written on. He's just a director. And he had certain conditions about the script. And it led to this interesting moment because to kind of dive into what two of his conditions were that Holmes could not say elementary Mary Watson and he could not wear a deer stalker, which are two of the cliches
Yeah,
that not in the canon.
I remember that. So much so they ended up wanting him to dress like Lautrec, who was like the famous French artist in Bohemian.
Right, which you get closer to in the second movie than in the first movie. There's some compromises here in the first movie. And as we dig in, I'm sure if Chris has already pointed them out, I will certainly point out there are certain homages here that clearly come from someone who absolutely fucking loves Sherlock Holmes, and specifically the Granada Sherlock Holmes, right? Um, but
I can't remember if it was Richie or someone else that was important in the production team, but when they grew up in a boarding school, they would pipe Sherlock Holmes over the PA system at night for all the kids.
I think it was Richie, but I wouldn't swear to it.
So I'm like 70% sure, but
Right,
uh, and which then go and reinforces like a love of the material. And you can tell that even regardless of what I'm going to say about it in a little bit, the person that was involved in it knew enough that they've infused Holmesiness into it,
right,
if even if it's not Holmesian by
right.
nature and design.
And also, again, shades of Jeremy Brett, RDJ did have on set copies of the books and would refer to them when discussing certain scenes. Right. And there's even stuff like Baritsu. Um, Baritsu is a made up martial art that Sherlock Holmes knows. And originally they were kind of just going to.
Is it called Slap Fu?
No, actually, it's based off stick fighting.
I only asked from multiple fighting scenes in this movie.
Well, the fighting scenes in this movie are actually because Art Jr. knows Wing Chun Kung Fu. And so he worked with the choreographer to try to develop a new made up martial art based off of the original
Yeah.
existing made up martial art to try to show in the movie. So as much as I want to, and probably will continue to make fun of RDJ's accents in this, he clearly wanted to make this movie the most Sherlock Holmes he felt it needed to be, and so Ritchie was also on that same boat. I think where the issue comes in is that sometimes what they both want out of it is a bit at odds, and that's kind of clear throughout the
Yeah.
film. And also, there you could see a certain amount of studio interference to make the film sit certain shapes that a movie in 2009 needs to be. But this movie did show Sherlock Holmes is a viable movie property because other TV shows have been around this time also showing that it's viable as a television show, but the show viable as movie property. And since then, we've had several Sherlock Holmes inspired movies. Not all of them in theaters, but certainly several have come out since then. And a lot of it comes to the work that was done in this movie.
Well, didn't they make? I want to say it was like $800 million or something at the end of the
Yeah,
day
yeah,
when it was all said and done. One of I think Richie's second highest grossing film, only coming after Aladdin. I
right,
think because Aladdin
right.
made over $1 billion.
Um, because we've talked before about kind of like the different ebbs and flows of Sherlock Holmes. What we're kind of seeing in the early 2000s is how do we, because before it was Sherlock Holmes and then let's take different takes of Sherlock Holmes. What's happening here and simultaneously in Sherlock, frankly, is how do we take a whole new approach to Sherlock Holmes but keep the core accurate? It's a whole new approach to Sherlock Holmes. We're not being completely faithful, but we're also not throwing away the actual things that make Sherlock Holmes good stories. And so we have a few different approaches to that. The BBC Sherlock is obviously but modern day, right? And then also, but what if the writer was a misogynist, which is a whole separate fucking issue. But this is more, what if Sherlock Holmes was an action thriller? And
And
there's some interesting choices made as a result of that that make this movie genuinely pretty good.
and while I may give it some stick, It is a movie that fits our bill, literally, of the title of our show of being genreless, because it touches
Hmm.
on some gothic horror, it touches on action, it touches on thriller, it even touches on sci-fi. It's all those genres kind of meld down into one movie.
Right, right. Um, and yes, there are a lot of historical inaccuracies. If you, I watched this on
What?
Amazon Prime, and I don't know if you know, but Amazon Prime, if you, there's a button you can hit, or if you're watching TV or on your computer, you can mouse over it, and it'll show you trivia along the one side, called the X-ray thing. And every 5 minutes, it's here's this historical accuracy, here's historical accuracy. So like all this, it's fast and loose with the history here, but there are also lots of little nods to the canon that just didn't need to fucking be there. Um, and on top of it, I mean, again, for all the stick we're probably going to give these folks, Rachel McAdams, Jude Law, and Robert Downey Jr. did their own stunts to the point where Robert Downey Jr. was straight up knocked out during one of the fight scenes.
Was it the fight scene or the explosive scene at like the dock where he's using that wooden plank
No,
to
that was all
guard
CGI.
himself?
No, it was just when he was fighting with Dredger, the big French guy.
Ah,
The big French actor
wow.
legitimately punched him out.
Oh god.
So yeah,
Is there anything else you want to talk about the background of the movie or the cast, or we could get into it itself?
the only other thing is to your point, right? This is showing a lot of what Sherlock Holmes genuinely is. It's not just a mystery. It's actually all of these other things. Um, the one thing I think this brings to the table, the shift that's happening in Sherlock Holmes media that we haven't seen previously, that we is now constant in Sherlock Holmes nowadays, is the idea that Sherlock Holmes ultimately is an adventure story. And that is something that I will 100% put in Guy Ritchie. As much as I love the Granada series, right? You and I both pointed out it could be a bit slow at times because it's still ultimately trying to be
Yeah.
a cerebral mystery, people in cool costumes TV show. Guy Ritchie's like, no, Sherlock Holmes fucking punches dudes, and that's cool. And that is something that is in the original stories. That's something that is in there. So there are lots of people who saw this like that's not Sherlock Holmes, and I had to argue with people. And so I admit some of my love for this movie is me having to defend this movie against my better instincts because I had to explain to people, no, 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 this stuff's all from the canon. It's just not the bits of the canon you're used to seeing.
Okay. I'm glad you preface that. So I was going to bring this up later, but I'll bring it up now. There is a lot of punching in there, but there should have been a better balance between Sherlock figuring out clues and explaining it to the audience. Did this movie loses?
Agreed.
And then you lose audience members. And I know for a fact because when I watched it the first time, I watched this movie twice. The first time I watched it with Jill, and she's like, "What the fuck is going on? Why? How does he know that? How is that happening?" Throughout the entire movie. And so that is someone who is not as steeped in this right now as we are. And you always, me, specifically for this moment.
Right.
But a casual viewer who she's seen it before when it came out, but hadn't seen it in 15 years.
Right.
I might have seen it once since
Right.
then, between now. And she was lost. And then watching it, it's because they don't go into the clues how they do for the better series that we've watched so far.
Right. I absolutely accept that Guy Ritchie has overcompensated to a certain degree, but also that's not the kind of movies he makes, right? He makes extremely fast-paced movies. Um, we last week I watched 3 hours of video. It took me a week and a half to get through that to finally write everything up. I put this movie on, and it was 2 hours later. I had just lost track of time because it's such a fast-paced movie, and it's so we keep using the word watchable. It's absolutely that. But you're absolutely right. It's not as much of a mystery as people expect.
Mm-hmm.
To the movie's credits, a lot of the major clues he does do the big at the end. Let me explain how I've solved the mystery thing. But he does
I
also.
hate
There's
that.
lots of gaps in reasoning that if you're actually paying attention to the movie, it's like, okay, yes, he saw this piece an hour ago, now I'm explaining it here. But if you actually think about those things next to each other, you realize a whole chunk of logic he's just straight up missing, right?
Yeah. And I point out I had to watch this movie twice because I watched it with her and I was having to explain stuff to her as we went. And the second time I watched it is so I could make the note sheet. because I stole some of this from the wiki, and then I infused it with some other little tidbits. So it is not much like Murder by Decree that I wrote from the
Right,
ground up.
right. Yes, luckily we're now
Um,
moving into a part of Sherlock Holmes that's relatively well documented, so we can finally find wiki things again, as opposed to that weird glut in the middle where it's just like nobody's written up anything about this movie anywhere. Crap.
I love how you say glut in the middle. We've been doing that almost from like the jump of the
Well,
Sherlock
that's
series.
fair.
I may
Yeah.
have to may say that in future we I'm not going to do that. We make false proclamations all
Right.
the time, and 2 weeks later
In
we can
future, we're gonna
correct
do this, except for the thing we're not gonna do right now. But certainly, there was a lot of like, oh, it's the radio programs. No one's written up this plot to the radio programs. Ah, great.
it. It's a show from the '50s that someone said Sherlock encounters a cowgirl.
Right.
Well, that's useful.
Right. Right.
All right. My last question for you, then we get into show proper. This is set in 1890s. When is that in Holmes's actual book career for where he's at from the text?
Uh, it's pretty accurate to the text. They because it's the first movie, they had to kind of dance around some things. But like, if we assume that a Sign of the Four takes place about a year before this, so we're talking 1890 specifically, right? It is a bit vague, but we assume 1890 or 1889. Okay, let me step back. There's another problem with dating this movie because at the very front, I'm gonna briefly touch the thought. He accuses Lord Blackwood of killing 5 women, which implies pretty heavily that he's supposed to be Jack the Ripper.
Yeah.
So that would be 1888. Um, uh, so if we assume 1889, which seems to be the most logical thing, then according to the canon, as far as we can tell, that's when Sign of Four happens, which is when Watson meets Mary Morstan. So this is taking some liberties by saying we're going to allude to Jack the Ripper because that's what people expect in a Victorian mystery film. And we're going to skip Holmes actually ever meeting Mary Morstan and have that happen off screen so that Watson's already prepared to marry her. And that's the big kind of plot for the film, which is frankly interesting. So much of Holmes' media at this point has ignored the Watson marriage. This is one of the few that actually says, no, we're actually going to address that head on and make it the spine of the movie. So that's interesting. But it does mean that the next movie that comes out, which is a rough adaptation of The Final Problem, has to happen like a year from now. And the internal evidence of the next movie doesn't quite line up with that. So it's a bit vague because Holmes disappears / dies in 1891, according to the canon. So it's not completely faithful. It doesn't absolutely gel with the story that's written, but it certainly gels a lot better than a lot of other Holmesian
Yeah.
adaptations, and uh, makes what are basically Easter eggs, right? It's a lot of Easter eggs to people who know the canon. Go, okay, I know what that's a reference to. That's a reference to. But if you actually try to slot it in, it doesn't quite work.
Okay. In the 1890s-ish London, we open on a gritty Lestrade and Watson checking their pistols as they ride in a patrol wagon, racing down a grim, dark cobblestone street. Then we spy Holmes parkour his way through the city before deducing what. Damn it! I threw myself off of my own parkour joke.
Parkour.
God damn it! Because in the 90s and early 2000s, parkour was all the rage. You saw Bond
Oh my god.
parkouring, you saw X parkouring, you saw Y parkouring. If there was a parkour to be had, it was parkoured there.
Yeah, yeah. I remember when I first saw Casino Royale, and I was like, "This parkour scene is great." And then every time I watch it, it's like, "Oh my god, this goes on for so long." Continue.
To redo what I just did, Gritty Lestrade, Gritty Watson, cobblestone streets, Holmes, parkour, and he enters a building. Then you see him deduce how to take down the first cultist in a basement. Chris of 15 years ago was thinking like this is my first home/mythos adventure, and it inspired me to run dozens of mystery games that were all Sherlockian in nature with some Cthulhu in there and some horror.
Yeah.
But I'll take a step back. Then we get a bit of Watson and Holmes humor as they dispatch another cultist. Then we honestly get the best action scene of this entire series run that Eddie has made me
Yep. Yep.
do.
100%.
Thank you, Guy motherfucking
100%.
Ritchie, Finally.
Yep.
The duo present the sixth murder. We learn that he has killed five of them beforehand, and it is Lord Henry Blackthorne. Lestrade and the police arrest Blackthorne, and you get a shot of someone trying to take pictures, and Holmes says, "No paparazzi."
Right.
And we're pausing there.
So, I mean, do you want to start with the fact that parkour didn't exist at this time period, or do you want to just accept that this shit's going to happen and me not ding every time these kinds of things pop up?
We should let some of the smaller ones go. There is one I'm going to bring up later, but if you want to talk about parkour, you can
No,
just go parkour.
the bigger one actually is that newspapers didn't actually have duotone photographs until like 3 years after this. So that's wrong.
For people that were going to wonder if Eddie was going to focus on the fact that Holmes is running as fast as the carriage itself, or the invisible glass blade that Holmes could spy in the darkness of a
I love
room
that.
to save Watson's
I love
life,
that.
or the overly long ritualistic murder that is obviously staged for Holmes's
Right.
benefit. Because if you're a cultist and you're chanting, you know, there's a time where you say, you know what, it's time to let the magic flow. And this does not happen. It's like, is Holmes ready yet? Has Holmes defeated my cultist yet? Nope, nope, nope.
I will say actually, as to the why is the chanting happening so long and why is the cult acting so strangely and obvious cinematic, the movie does actually explain that, right? And I mean, the first time I watched this, I was like, oh man, this is gonna be a Holmes versus Cthulhu thing, and it's gonna suck. I was like ready to hate this movie. My like first 5 minutes, first time I watched it. To the movie's credit, it does explain that at the end, not entirely satisfactorily. I'm sure we'll talk about that, but
Yep.
it does try to explain this. And so
I want people to wait. I want people to pause and think about this. Chris of 15 years ago was excited. Eddie of 15 years ago was like, fuck it, A, don't do
right.
this. Please proceed.
Well, so that brings up an interesting point. Like around this time, Sherlock Holmes and Cthulhu mythos start really becoming more entwined. Um, it's been happening in the tabletop RPG scene for quite a while, but more culturally, there was a Sherlock Holmes vs. Cthulhu anthology comes out around this time. Then shortly after
I own
this,
that.
Holmes versus the Cthulhu Mythos novels come out, which I'm not a fan of, but they exist. And so Guy Ritchie's genuinely and accurately tapping in something, which is that Holmes can be other genres. And so even 10 years ago, 20 years ago, actually, young Sherlock Holmes does this, right? Young Sherlock Holmes tries to be about magic, and then Holmes debunks it. That's the plot of Young Sherlock Holmes at a very, very high level. Um, and so Ritchie taps in and goes, okay, that's actually a valid way to approach Sherlock Holmes because given the media mashups that are happening in the turn of the century now, the audience can't be entirely sure magic isn't on the table. Whereas in Young Sherlock
Yeah.
Holmes, really the question is, how does Holmes debunk this? In this, it's is Guy Ritchie genuinely bringing magic into Sherlock Holmes? And we don't really know entirely sure. Spoiler, it's not. But um,
How can you be certain that in the time for young Indiana Jones? No, we said young Sherlock Holmes.
yeah,
Thank you. Because I was thinking young Indiana Jones in my
right,
brain and I was remembering the Grail. So technically, magic does exist and the Ark of the
right,
Covenant if you want to get into specifics. But sorry, digression. Please
right.
proceed.
But it's more the point is like, um, in the 80s, there was more kind of an unwritten rule, like Sherlock Holmes has to be a scientific reason for everything. That was fading, and one of the reasons why I think Young Sherlock Holmes does well is that it recognizes that things were on a pivot, but it couldn't quite commit to that. And also, mild spoilers for what we're talking about in the future, there are going to be genuine Sherlock Holmes in supernatural settings in future. But Guy Ritchie recognizes that there's enough muddiness culturally now that he can play with this, and audience expectations are genuinely don't know if this is actually a magical scenario or not, and that conflict and debate goes through most of the film. So at the time, it was genuinely exciting, although I was nervous because I had read some pretty bad takes on this prior to this. Immediately after this, some really good takes came out, and so I was quickly dissuaged, but there are some Sherlock Holmes versus Dracula books that are just dire. So
How do you like how we're going to do fights in this movie going forward? We have Holmes deducing, analyzing his opponents and everything else, and running through the list of things before actually going into really doing the fight. How do you like
I
that
like
take?
the idea. I don't think it needed to be done twice, which we're getting to in a minute. And I wish it had been applied to actual deduction more. Um, so it's like when you first watch it, it's like, oh, it makes sense. Sherlock Holmes quickly analyzes things and figures out the solution. Why can't he apply that to fighting? That makes sense.
Yeah.
But the let's slow down, walk through a problem, and meet with voiceover narration, and then rewind and go through that normal speed thing. That could have been applied to other, and they try to make they in later scenes they do try an attempt at that, but it's never quite as clear as the fight scenes because I think ultimately in the day, Guy Ritchie, his meat and potatoes is action, and so that's where he's clearly the most comfortable. And I think for the more cerebral parts, I think he's a little less comfortable. And I was trying to find ways to inject some energy into those scenes, and therefore muddied those a bit more.
Okay. Hmm. Any other comments on the opening bit before we go?
It's just a fantastic way to open a movie, frankly.
I did enjoy the grittiness of Lestrade and Watson in the back of the patrol car loading
Hmm.
guns. Like that was a nice hint, and that prepares you for the whole rest of the movie. Seeing those, and it was also interesting that they chose not to open the film on Holmes.
Yeah, yeah, they do a good job of the supporting cast, and actually that brings up a good point. We have been talking about Watson's shifting relationship in Holmes media and the frankly egregious step back that happened in the 90s. But here with Jude Law, even in the marketing, Jude Law was positioned as the second lead. Watson is not a subordinate. He's not Holmes' assistant. He is the second protagonist of this film. Even if Sherlock Holmes' name's on the title, Watson is just as important. So I always thought it was great. You're right that they show Watson and Lestrade. It's like, oh, here's the supporting cast are also going to be interesting here. But also it helps to cement that Watson is actually really the character we're following in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
No, I love that.
And since we didn't mention him at the when we talk about some of the cast, a head nod to the incomparable Eddie Marston as Lestrade.
Yes.
Loved it. Everything.
Frankly,
He's amazing.
frankly, one of my favorite Lestrades. I genuinely love this Lestrade.
Yeah, because he's a little done with Holmes, but he still's on Holmes' side. He's competent at his
Right.
job. Oh, but he also doesn't know a lot of stuff, which you get in a scene we're coming to in a
Right.
minute. It's so
But the one
nice.
thing I like about because particularly Lestrade is that Lestrade is described in the canon as kind of a rat. He latches onto a problem and just gnaws at it. And so he's described as kind of a rat-like face and whatnot. Um, but his tenacity is commonly referred to in the canon. And so Lestrade succeeds as the guy who will knock on every single door and follow every single lead and do the drudgery that Holmes just can't be fucking bothered with, right? And so I like this interpretation of Lestrade, particularly as you go through the movie, because you're right. It's not only done with Holmes, but also it's like I have to do the work you don't want to do, but this is the work that also cracks open cases.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I love this Lestrade.
3 months later, Watson is engaged to Mary Marston and is moving out of 221B Baker Street, much to Mrs. Hudson's chagrin, from dealing with Sherlock's constant antics. Watson trying to help Holmes find a new case, and Holmes easily dismisses every single thing he brings up within 2 seconds. And we get a shot of the new dog, Gladstone. Yes, finally another dog. So you know this is going to be a good version
Yep,
of Sherlock
agree.
Holmes. Later that evening at the Royale, without cheese, we have Marston and Holmes' first meeting. It does not go well. We learn that Watson is/was a gambler. Holmes is still an ass, and Marston is an excellent aim as she hits Holmes in the face with her wine. We transition to Holmes engaging in a little fisticuffs in a public fight club. practicing the art of slapping and taking a beating until he spies Adler's clue and sees her lurking in the crowd. After he deduces again how to execute "This is Sparta" to win the match.
Right.
Eddie's face every time I do these things
Uh,
is why I come back every week for this
it
podcast.
just to look at my face. Um, so
It was fun when we used to do it just audio for like the first 2 episodes, but
uh,
this is so much better.
so this is the chunk of the movie where I get into one of the most conflicted parts of the movie, um, because Holmes doing the cold reading of Mary Morstan is good, right? Because we actually get to show this is what Holmes does. It's what I refer to lovingly as Sherlock Holmes bullshit. So people expect
Yeah.
in a Sherlock Holmes movie is exactly this kind of scene. So we have to have it. Great. Um, how he wraps it up is a bit too Tony Stark for me, right? Because when he does the at the very end, he's like, a doctor perhaps, and he turns and then gets splashed with the wine. That whole
Mhm.
moment feels very much like Tony Stark. It doesn't feel like Sherlock Holmes to me. Uh,
So the flourish that he puts on
right,
it is unhomesian.
right, because Mary is clearly holding it together. Like I'm not gonna punch this guy until he insults Watson, and then she does that to him. And part of the thing that we're setting up here is that we're setting up much more bickering relationship between Holmes and Watson, which is something that we haven't really seen before in media. And again, two male friends going off on adventures in a 2009 movie, you have to have some of this on some level, right? So like, that's just the nature of
Yeah,
how media is produced that time period. But that was a bit too far for her, and frankly, it was a bit too far for me.
I can see that.
I, on the flip
Um,
side, the Watson gambling thing is backed up by the canon, and it's a very small part of the canon. But uh, uh, it's never explicitly spelled out. Rather, how Watson describes things, how he references taking a flutter during like Silver Blaze, which is the horse racing story.
yeah.
And there's another one where he makes a side mention to Holmes locking up his winnings from a wager from billiards, I want to say. So that whole subplot of Watson's gambling addiction is actually supported by the canon, and it's a small piece that they then drag out and make larger. So I was actually happy to see that. So that's why I said this chunk has been conflicted because like Watson's gambling addiction is actually a really cool deep cut that I wanted to see, but it's in the midst of Holmes just. It was clearly a visual moment to show, but it didn't land well for me. So very conflicting scene.
I'm in much agreement. The one thing that I did really like about the scene is that every time we get a Holmes breaking someone down
Hmm.
scene that we've seen, he always makes one mistake in the breaking down
Yeah.
of it to show it's
Hmm.
off. And that is a constant that we've seen, I think, like through the entire
Hmm.
run. And is a small piece that I love to always
Agreed.
happen. That he's never 100% accurate.
Hmm. Yeah, and again, showing so one thing that's kind of happening here is that we're trying to soften Holmes's superpower of deduction a little bit to give Watson more room, and so it's a good one because the thing he gets wrong is that her former husband didn't leave her; he died, which is both something that you could see him making a mistake on, but also it's a very different emotional tone. It's like Holmes wouldn't understand why that difference matters, but Mary and Watson both do, and that's why Mary's upset. So I like the dynamics that are happening here. It's just for me how it was, frankly, how it was shot, which just and how it was a bit of how it was acted, just landed a bit wrong.
While we're on the scene about the relationship, it is frustrating how they constantly try to reinforce Holmes and Watson as brothers, as if they're trying to strip away the fact that we all know I'm gonna do it. Holmes and Watson are boning day and night. Holmes is a jealous lover that Mary is now entered their lives. It is one of the only reasons he would be so childish in all of his behavior going
Sure,
forward.
and certainly this movie.
Brothers.
I mean, I know you're doing this as a joke to some level, but also this movie does encourage the queer reading of Holmes and Watson more without actually saying it outright. Um, Again, BBC Sherlock, I keep bringing it up because they came out within a year of each other, so they're often compared.
Yeah.
Um, went too far the other direction. It became a running joke of everyone assumed they were gay. No, 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 we're just roommates, and that became their potential relationship became a gag, and that's one of the reasons, many reasons why I don't like that show. Here, it's just a layer onto their arguments that you can very justifiably read that doesn't invalidate the movie in any way.
Yes. And I still stand by. They are a couple. What I don't like is this movie trying to say they're brothers at every turn to strip that away or cover up that part of the
Right,
reading.
right, right. Yeah, I agree with that. But you could make an argument that that's just kind of a euphemism or brothers in arms. But I agree that it does muddy that. But from an emotional reading, not a straight everything said out there. If you assume that people are not saying what they always mean, emotional reading, them being more than friends and Holmes being mad at that, and therefore that's why he's acting childish is, I think, a valid read. I do also, yeah, still in the scene, but the other thing I do,
That's why it was just a short little
right,
blurb for this, because this is an important
right,
scene.
the next one, not so much, but uh, also I forgot to mention, I do also like the Holmes being overwhelmed by information thing, which is something that's relatively new to the Holmes reading at this time, and again becomes a much more common interpretation of Holmes from this point on. Um, it never This movie never straight up says Holmes is neurodiverse. Other later interpretations will dig into that more. More specifically, Elementary goes into that more. But this is kind of a first step towards Holmes just doesn't perceive the world the same way. And it's a small moment, and it doesn't really come up in the movie again. It's not. It doesn't really do anything for the plot or the character. It's purely showing we are taking Holmes in a new direction. That's going to be still relatively faithful to the core of the character. And so again, much like the Watson loading a gun scene sets the tone for the movie, that's another piece that sets the tone for the movie going forward.
Yeah.
And then the
Oh.
Fight Club.
All right. Anything about the restaurant before we go into Fight
Oh
Club?
God, do we have to?
Yes, it is part of the movie. It is literally what he does after that frustrating dinner.
Right. Um, this is one of those scenes where it's like, as a writer, I understand the need for the scene. I understand why it exists because it sets up things that paid off later on, and also from an emotional journey. Holmes having a bad dinner and then taking his frustrations on somebody else. That all maps. And Guy Ritchie's going, cool, I get to film another fight scene. Of course, you're going to film fight scenes if you're Guy Ritchie. That also makes sense. It just didn't need to be here.
But all right, so you said taking his frustrations out on someone else.
Right.
I read it the exact opposite way.
Really?
He's feeling he's feeling regret and shame for what he did at that dinner to Watson and now to Mary, and he's letting this dude beat the ever living shit out of him. Literally, I make a joke about slapping because that's really all he's doing, and that guy is straight up just punching Holmes until he sees Adler's like clue, and then that what changes the fight. That's when he says, "All right, you won, you beat me," and the guy won't let it go. And that's when we get another, "Oh, I will do a deduction fight," and beat him, and saying like he'll physically recover in 6 weeks. The emotional trauma will be 6 months.
Right.
So you have him flip a switch to become inhuman again, becoming calculating. Is the best way to put it.
That's interesting. And as I'm thinking it through, I think it's a valid read. The reason why I never read it that way was because of the bet. At the end, he picks up a bunch of money, and then, granted, this line later in the movie, he says, I placed your customary bet with Watson. And then the money he gives, the share of the winnings, then goes towards another subplot of the movie. So I had always interpreted that he went there with the intention of winning money as a way to get money to help Watson to buy the ring that he knows he hasn't been able to afford as a way to apologize because Holmes can't directly apologize for anything. But now that you say that, I could see Holmes covering the spread, as it were, of saying, I'm going to place the bet,
Mm-hmm.
but really subconsciously, I'm here to feel pain.
Yep.
So I could see that being valid. Actually, the more I think, the more I talk it out, actually, no, I think that's interesting. That you've helped me to appreciate the scene better, actually, because my interpretation was just like he goes in, he kicks some guy's ass, and he gets some money. But now that you said that, that actually does give the scene a bit more resonance.
So, thank you. I like that. That's one of the joys, really, the joking about seeing you do stuff aside, is that we each have similar takes on things, but we also see the world differently from our lived
Hmm.
experiences. And we get to bring that and we share it together, and it changes how we view the media.
Yeah,
That is
yeah.
what the power of
And
media and why I love it
usually it
so much.
improves the experience, and occasionally you both go, "No, this is so much worse than I thought it was going to be." But mostly it improves the experience when we do that.
Blackwood, claiming supernatural powers, is sentenced to death by hanging, but not before requesting to see Holmes. And he warns Holmes that 3 more unstoppable deaths will cause great changes to the world. The duo banter as Blackwood again stresses his seriousness and senses Holmes's weakness. Then he gives Holmes creepy eyes. Holmes nevertheless dismisses his claims, and Blackwood is hanged. Watson officially pronounces him dead. Adler visits Holmes for some flirting and notes he's between jobs as his apartment is in a mess and he's on the floor unconscious when she shows up. She asks him to find a missing person, a Luc Renaud. After her departure, Holmes follows with comical hijinks her as she meets with her secret employer, a professor in the back of a car who is obviously intimidating Adler, pulls a gun on Holmes in disguise, and Holmes is easily let go again. Adler later. Watson provides some exposition about who Adler is, and Holmes and Watson flirting again, something that brothers do not do
Well, I mean,
unless they're from
oh,
Alabama.
it
Boom! I can
might,
make an Alabama joke because I'm from
but it's
Alabama.
illegal, right? Um, so again, like from a structural standpoint, I like this scene because we have to convince the audience that magic is on the table. And so, of course, the evil magician with 3 more deaths. So, of course, 3 people are going to die in the movie. So we have to believe that's true. Um, my frustration is that he's hanged and Watson declares him dead. That's the first big mystery that we have to solve. Spoiler: never actually completely resolved. it,
But do we want to give the clues now from the end of the movie
I think we
here
have to
and
because
not
there's a
wait?
lot of back and forth that kind of makes certain things happen in the movie give context for the earlier in the movie. So I think we do have to kind of go back and forth here a bit.
But Eddie, it's like a chemical or a spider bite that makes you apparently appear dead for a certain amount of time that could fool even the best physician.
Now, I will say that kind of made up bullshit is straight out of the canon, right?
I saw that in James Bond.
Well, yeah, James Bond also derives from the same earlier tradition. But like there's an entire story where a guy shoots up monkey glands, ground up monkey glands, and becomes an evil rampaging monster. So like Doyle is not immune from made up chemical bullshit.
Of course not. Much like arcane powder, it's like odorless, tasteless, and
Right, exactly. Um, but the problem is that Holmes says it was probably this, and then later on it's like he survived the hanging because there was a hook on the back of his jacket, which seems like, and then the hook they show is a pretty big one. You think you noticed that?
all right. If we're going to take a step back, then we have to go all the way back a little bit further to where he's claiming he has supernatural powers and the guard who's like dying and
Right,
wriggling on the floor. We know that Blackthorn has paid people or that he has spies already set
right,
throughout. So it's easy to assume the people that are going to hang him, which is me having to give the movie something, which I
right,
shouldn't have to, that they put the hook there and they ignored the hook and they removed the hook before they took his poison bitten, slightly unconscious body to Watson to be examined.
right. Um,
And that's where wears that long, super cool black trench coat when you're being hanged.
but I mean, I think that what the issue is that it feels like it's a subplot that probably got pruned down a bit too much either in script editing or in film editing, because the structural thing here is that Watson finds out that Blackwood is still alive and therefore wants to prove his worth as a doctor, that he wasn't made up. Um, and so that's why he keeps being drawn back. But that is actually a cover for the fact he secretly still wants to go on mysteries with Sherlock Holmes, even though he's getting married, right? So that all makes sense, but you never quite get the outrage that Watson gets for the "I thought he was dead" point. And if it was an important subplot, Holmes or someone should have explained that mystery a bit more as opposed to an afterthought right near the end of the film. And if it's not a subplot, then Watson's outrage should not have been brought up much at all. And then it becomes, oh, here's a loose thread that we forgot to tie up. So it doesn't, it could go either direction, but it goes for a middle ground that makes both directions unsatisfactory.
Well, if we want to talk about that, then we should talk about how Jude Law is portraying the character of Watson. Watson is very much, I said gritty at the start because I was really digging the vibe, but throughout the course of it, Watson is relatively bland throughout. He makes a couple little quips here and there, and he's flirty with Holmes, but I mean, like the actual acting choices themselves are bland. They don't bring anything dynamic, which part of it could be he's trying to downplay his own stuff
Mm-hmm.
to offset Downey Jr.'s like over the top Holmesiness. But I could just be off.
I agree. To be honest, Jude Law is not one of my favorite Watsons either. Uh, I, I think Watson, most of what's interesting about Watson is brought by the writing, not by Jude Law. Let's put it that way. They're making some interesting choices on how they're writing him and how they're shooting him and how they're presenting him. They're showing a different part of Watson's life that we don't normally see in media. So these are all interesting choices. But Jude Law is not building on that foundation very much. He's just basically constantly vaguely annoyed by everything is how he's playing it, which is in and of itself an interesting choice for Watson, but there's a very damn with faint praise of for Watson. It doesn't make him an interesting character just holistically, and frankly, he's not an interesting character holistically.
And that part that he's playing to do that is not offset by the amount of affection that he should have for Holmes.
Right.
So that's a weird dynamic to have Watson be overly antagonistic to Holmes, to have Lestrade be more friendly but antagonistic to Holmes than Watson is, and Mary as well should be for how she's written here to be antagonistic to
Right.
Holmes.
Right. So we're definitely, for both of the scenes, honestly, we're kind of hitting a point where it's like, it's clear where the setup's going to be, but as the movie goes on, you start to realize that everything it's promising, you're not going to quite get a resolution for, which is not, I won't say it's inherently a problem. It is a problem. Um, but I think more of the point, it's not really what Guy Ritchie cares about as a director. If
Yeah.
you watch Snatch or Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels and whatnot, uh, uh, clear resolutions of character arcs is not what he cares about, and that's clear, and that's fine. He wants pretty broad stroke character changes and lots of interesting set pieces and lots of fun banter. So from that perspective, this movie is absolutely delivering on that. But I think my frustration with this movie is that it's so high quality in so many other places, so that when it's lower quality, it shows up a bit more, as opposed to, like, say, last week when everything was so low quality that the little bits of high quality are like exciting to see. This is like the bar is so much higher now, and so when you see those little gaps, it's like, oh, if you'd just gone this little bit further,
Speaking of that, I am loving Mark Strong
Oh
as
my god,
Blackwood.
he's so good.
The level he is chewing cedar. There's some cedar. Let me gnaw on
Yes.
it. Every chance, and he gives creepy face whenever he can, and they do extra bits with the camera work to make it strike even more. I enjoy like the psychological games he's playing with
Yep.
Holmes right now to let him know there'll be three people. There's nothing you can do about it. Suck it up, deal with it, and then elevate your game. He's taunting him to be better.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
And if you need someone who, in the course of 2 hours, has to feel like a potential rival to Holmes, you've got to fucking swing for the bleachers. And yeah, Strong is absolutely doing that, and I love him for it. He's just like, I'm gonna be the best goddamn master I could possibly be.
And then we counter that amazingness with Rachel McAdams, Irene Adler.
So I mentioned last week that this is the point where Holmes and Adler being a couple is kind of codified, and we're seeing the next step in that evolution, which is that Adler and Holmes being it's just now an assumption. It's just as read. Of course, this is what's happening, and so we don't need to even explain it or address it. Which means McAdams has to do no work to actually establish chemistry because the script's saying, "Oh, no, they have chemistry, so we don't need to do anything."
And this is where I'll bring up Jill saying, "Hey, who's that person?"
Right?
Um, I'm gonna. People should know from last time when I talked about Morgan Fairchild being able to like bring something to Adler, even in a script that was giving her
Yeah,
nothing. Rachel McAdams does not do that for me. I don't see it. I don't know why she was cast, other than RDJ saying they could cast her. She is an exceptional actress. I've seen her
yeah.
in other things. This is not a role that I think shows her strengths.
So we have in the past in other shows talked about how it's really clear people are having fun and how a lot of times that brings an extra elements to what we're watching. A lot of classic Doctor Who is okay. This is terrible on some levels, but everyone's having fun, and so that makes it more enjoyable to watch. I think we're seeing the flip side of that. I think genuinely the Bart Downey Jr., Jude Law, and Rachel McAdams are having fun working together. And so I think what's happening is that Jude Law and Rachel McAdams are feeling they don't have to work as hard.
I can see that. Well, that was also like some of the old Rat Pack movies with Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., and Dean
Oh
Martin,
yeah,
where they would get together on movies and just have a whole bunch of fun. And the movie, their acting wasn't great, but the amount of fun they had carried them film to make it what it
right.
was. Here, they're having a lot of fun, but it is, for me, because I can't say anything because the movie was a smashing success with $800 million, does not carry the movie.
No,
And it's not just her, but I think part of it is her chemistry with Junior Downey Jr. that we see on screen, coupled with Watson's weird relationship with Holmes here. Something in that triad needed to be different, or to have given Adler more agency. Because I am an Adler stand.
yeah,
I think Adler should have her own series. I've said before, and I don't know who an actress might have been better to have done the role, because I'm trying to remember like 2007ish when the movie was really
right,
made. Maybe Rachel Weisz, but there's a presence that she doesn't have here and doesn't bring to the role, given the weakness that the character
right.
has.
And I'm gonna hate myself for saying this. I know it's gonna come out of my mouth. I'm gonna be mad at myself, but this is one place where Mary Morstan as spy actually works better in Sherlock, BBC Sherlock.
I'm sorry, Eddie. What did you
No,
just
I'm not
say?
repeating that. Because what we have here is we have two simultaneous romantic relationships. So there's just too much emotional stuff going on. There's no room for a Holmes Adler relationship to go. As much stick as we gave uh, Leading Lady, they spent a good amount of time trying to build that romance between Holmes and Adler. It's just that Christopher Lee wasn't up to making sure that progression was a smooth progression, right?
Mhm.
Here, the opposite is true. There's no, they just have the entire relationship as read and assume the audience has bought into that relationship because, again, culturally, it's just assumed. And the whole movie's weaker because, again, now is McAdams have to not do any work, but also the script doesn't have to do any work. So it's just, oh, they're gonna fuck around for a while, and Adler has is basically just kind of the doctor's companion. She just asks questions and regurgitate things, and occasionally helps out, which could have been carved off and given to someone like Mary Morstan or to Watson and make those relationships a little clearer. Or hell, even like have Lestrade do some of the carrying and lifting on some of those scenes, right?
You could have given some of them to Miss Hudson to come in
Yeah,
and ask Holmes, "What are you doing over
right,
there?"
right,
She's already there. She's supposed to be part of their home anyway, and if it happens at the home base, she could bolster her role. Yeah, it's
right. It comes down to we have to establish Adler so she can be kidnapped, so Holmes has a quote unquote reason to go after Blackwood, even if the fact that Blackwood is the bad guy isn't enough reason, right? It's you could cut Adler from the script and nothing fundamental would change about the movie,
correct, and that's part of my
right?
problem. And the acting does not change my problem, but I also think, as you said, they were having too much fun, and I see that
Mhm.
now, and it's um. We get a glimpse of a shadowy professor.
Mm, yeah, yeah.
Wonder who that's going to be.
Gee, I wonder if it's Moriarty.
Fun fact,
Mhm.
though, is that they hadn't cast what's his nose yet, who's going to be Moriarty.
Right.
And for all the releases of the videos, they dubbed over the original actor with his voice.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So that's why he sounds like that. Now, originally Richie didn't want people to know who it was, but it was some other actor who I had not heard of, but you may have. I don't remember his
No,
name
I
though.
didn't know.
But so yeah,
I
so everything afterwards, everything you get now has what's his nose's voice.
I did not know that. Which again gets an interesting state because I did see this in the theater, and but it was a long time before I watched it on video, so it was far enough that I wouldn't have remembered that. So that's actually a cool touch. You know, the fact is like now for releases, we've cast the actor for the next movie, so we're gonna go ahead and had that bit of continuity back in. That's a nice touch.
Makes you think they had a whole plan all the way
Yeah,
through.
no,
They just kind of lost it. A Blackwood sighting, and someone claims to sight at Blackwood, and so his tomb is being destroyed from inside out. All right, Eddie. I okay. You know what? I will give the synopsis before I get into my
okay,
shtick here. Someone claims to have seen Blackwood, and the police are there. The tomb is destroyed, supposedly destroyed from the inside out. That is what people then begin to believe, that Blackwood has risen from the grave. The police dig up the coffin. It is still filled with a different occupant that's not Blackwood. Watson figures out the time of death. It was roughly 10 to 12 hours ago, based on the missing persons who Adler wanted Holmes to find were no. Following a series of clues from the body, Holmes and Watson find the hideout. And this is where I start to have a problem.
okay,
On their way to find the hideout, a fortune teller tries to persuade Watson to leave Mary, and you find out that Holmes has paid the fortune teller, inferring Holmes must have already known the location of the hideout so the fortune teller could be planted there before they show up. How? In response, Watson immediately goes out and buys a ring. The duo arrive at the hideout and discover different experiments trying to merge science and magic. A fight ensues. Watson loses the ring. Holmes wins his fight through science. The duo end up incarcerated after destroying the dock as the original battle raged on. Watson saves Holmes. Watson is freed from incarceration by Mary, and Holmes is later released by Lestrade.
right,
Eddie,
right.
do you want me to go to the fortune teller, or do you want to go back to the actual clues a
So let's
bit?
go back. Let's go back to the Rise from the Grave thing, which is again a neat. So there's a whole genre of Sherlock Holmes debunks supernatural kind of stories, right? They're in the usual canon, like I said, and whatnot. And so, when they're written well, there's a lot of fun for the how does Holmes explain this obviously miraculous seeming event, right? And this scene has like is 75% right and 25% completely horribly wrong. It's the how did Riordan come back from the grave? He didn't. He was never buried to begin with. He was never killed. Okay, cool, great. So great locked room mystery style solution. Room was naturally really unlocked. You know, whatever. Um, how did Riordan get in there? Well, because Blackwood killed him during the time he was allegedly dead, and then put him in the coffin so that he could put him there. Okay, closed casket things were not entirely unknown, but you think someone would have checked. But okay, sure, whatever. I more or less go along with that. Uh, why there was dirt in the coffin could argue to try to make sure the weight disparity wasn't noticed. Okay, but
It's a lot of dirt.
right, certain amount of also because it looks cool. All right, but then we get to the stone slab was shattered from the inside out, and the response we find out later is that it was actually made of sandstone and was held together by adhesive made of honey and eggs. Now, and it was washed away by the rain. Stone, no matter how sandstony it might be, is still pretty heavy. It's kind of, you could argue, it's one of its defining qualities. And so, if it falls, it's going to fall in, not out. And also, when you put the slab on top of the thing, you would think that the fact that it had huge cracks running through it when it was glued
Collapsing.
together would have been noticed.
I'm just baffled by the strength of the adhesive.
Yeah, who knew that Honey and Eggs was so strong?
So yeah, there's just so much, like, and I don't want to. Part of the reason I think that they could try to do this is the movie is so fast paced, as we
Right,
said, that what Richie does, and it keeps you engaged that you don't think about it and you just move on past it.
right.
Unfortunately, I think we are both the thinkers of the movie, even fast paced. Is like, wait a second, something about that doesn't feel right. So you pause for a second and go, wait, none of that makes any
Right.
sense.
And again, to Richie's credit, he's really good at moving the deduction as far away from the clue as possible so people don't see those close together and find the obvious flaw. He tries to space out as far as possible. If this had been a television show, put a couple of ad breaks in there, it'd be even better, right? So
Yeah.
I see what he's trying to do, and it's a smart move, but it's a shitty solution to the problem. It really comes down to we want to explain why Robert Downey Jr. is licking rocks. That's what this scene's about.
And so, but my still one of my big problems is going to be the fortune teller who is there at the place they're going before they get there, which undercuts, by the way, a bit of brilliant deduction on Watson's part about the
Yeah.
pawn shop as he's on pace with
Yep.
Holmes. Didn't have all that undercut by this woman who comes up to read Watson's fortune and then tell him about all the horrible stuff associated with Mary, to then find out she's paid by Holmes. So Holmes must have already known that they were going beforehand to set all this up to have her be there to intercept them.
Right. And we've talked about uh, Holmes undercutting Watson before. Actually, even last week we talked about how it happened quite frequently. Uh, and at least this is a more subtle undercutting of Watson. He's not directly telling him, "No, you're wrong. I already knew that." Right? I mean, at least there's that going for it. But you're right. It's when you sit and think about it, it's like, wait a minute. Not only did Holmes know this, Holmes had to have known this at least like several hours beforehand, before they went to
Yeah.
where Riordan's body was found.
Yeah.
Which
Which where they got the
right,
clues to lead them
right,
here.
which goes down to this was probably a scene written in another part of the script and it got moved here, is how it feels. And they didn't think through the ramifications of moving that scene here. I would bet money this scene was originally supposed to take place before they went to go see where Blackwood allegedly came back from the dead.
Probably.
Because I could see a line where it's like, the man you've killed has not really been killed because Holmes doesn't believe he's really dead. And then it leads to this scene, but I can also see why that got moved because the pacing would have been off. It would have been too much fluff before we get back to the mystery. So I said, well, just flip the order of those scenes and didn't think through just like you did. But then Holmes would have known about this hours beforehand.
No. And like I let a lot of the movie go. This is a part where I was like, what the fuck?
Right.
Because my brain would not move past this. Like, there's no way that could happen without this happening. And then I went back and I rethought through everything as I watched it. This is what I watched when I was watching with Jill the first time, that I hadn't seen it in like
Right.
5-7 years. And it was, ugh.
That said, Holmes coming up with elaborate pranks on Watson does track, right? like the concept of I'm going to hire a fortune teller to talk shit about your fiance is petty, but it is also very much in Holmes's theatrical bent. So it didn't feel
Yeah.
off from a character perspective. It's just an order of operations problem.
Yeah. That's how my brain
Yep.
operates, though. Then we get our fight scene, which is, of course, humorous and funny. And we get some high tech shenanigans with Holmes and his new electrical prod.
Yeah, which at that point in time, my brain started, oh, this is Briscoe County Jr. Because again, we talked this last week, but again, it's that kind of, it's just weird science stuff because reasons.
But it was nice to have a fight that Holmes could not win through physical strength, because I understand that Holmes as a boxer is fit, but Holmes is not like a
Right.
brawler. And to fight a real brawler, it was nice to see that Holmes needed to rely on his other skills.
And actually, can I say, Robert Millay, who played Dredger, um, I specifically got his name up because he did such a fantastic job, not only bringing amount of humor to that fight, but also while not speaking English, is genuinely good. Um, and just like things like Holmes taking the hammer and just bouncing off of Dredger's chest, and then the give me a moment, un moment s'il vous plaît, of course, and then switching that line back and forth between a fight. Again, just really, really good stuff. This is where Guy Ritchie's influence is definitely showing. And again, to have an actor who's here to play the big tough guy bring actual genuine levity and malice to that scene, again, while not speaking English, is really good. So this one, he's my favorite bit part in this whole movie is Dredger.
I can see that, and it is really good. For me, it brought back, and I made my Princess Bride joke earlier for a
Yeah,
reason, is it brought back the Wesley and Andre the Giant
yeah,
fight.
totally.
And part of it also brings back the James Bond fight that he's had before too,
Hmm.
and Goldfinger.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's lots of those things, and you could tell that Guy Ritchie has watched them and he brought them here to play, and they worked very
Right,
well.
yeah. But again, it's really reestablishing that this is that ultimately this is an adventure film, right? It's not a mystery, and I think where the dissonance happens is it's like, but Sherlock Holmes, of course, it's a mystery, and so when your mystery is a bit weak, then everything else starts to look a little suspect. So,
Yeah,
uh, like, of course, there's a random the gadget that he has is randomly explained in one line later, and the explanation is not very good to begin with. So functionally, there's just a magic science thing here because Holmes uses magic science things to beat the big guy. And if the rest of the movie's logic wasn't so wobbly, I would just excuse that. But we're now starting to see, well, this piece is a bit off, and this piece is a bit off, and this piece is a bit off, and this piece is a bit off. And for a character whose whole concept is logical deduction and trying to solve problems, you can't have the logic of your movie be this wobbly and not have it at least looked at.
100%. All right, we're gonna move on. Otherwise, I'd get bogged down in some of the fight choreography. Holmes is taking the Temple of the Four Orders, a secret magical fraternity with considerable political influence. The leaders are the Lord Chief Justice, the U.S. Ambassador, and the Home Secretary. They ask Holmes to stop Blackwood, a former member of their society, and Sir Thomas's secret illegitimate son. He was conceived during one of their rituals by accident. And they fear his power and stress that he'll only get more dangerous. Holmes takes a break to flirt with Adler and give an update about her missing persons case and warns her to flee because if he's dead, they're going to come after her. That night, Sir Thomas drowns in his bathtub as Blackwood watches. Holmes inspects the crime scene the next day, finding the clues left and right, including Thomas's secret occult
Like you
shrine.
do.
He pilfers vital clues. You said
I just said
something?
like you do. Yeah, of course you have a culture.
Ah. Pilfers vital clues under the police's noses. The next night, Lord Coward calls a meeting of the order and nominates Blackwood to take command in place of Sir Thomas. Blackwood reveals to the group that his intention is to seize control of the British Empire and reconquer the United States. Standish tries to shoot Blackwood, but bursts into flames when he pulls the trigger of his gun and takes a plummet out of the window, presumably to his death. Holmes Holmes guilt over Watson. Holmes guilts Watson in continuing to aid him in the case. The duo follow up on a lead from the cadaver arriving at the docks too late to stop Blackwood, who flees while the dynamic duo free Adler from a death trap. Adler's only purpose in the movie. Watson pursues Blackwood only to trigger another death trap that explodes a dock, incapacitating the trio. Uh, Coward issues an arrest warrant for Holmes, causing him to go into hiding. Adler attempts to leave London, but is intimidated into returning to Holmes and doing her job by the professor, who wants the secrets of Blackwood's assistant. Holmes, in disguise, checks up on an unconscious Watson, only to find Mary with him, and she forgives Holmes and orders him to solve the case, whatever it takes.
Okay. Um, so I mentioned a minute ago that you should pay attention to details when you're making a movie like this. And again, I've given a lot of credit. Some details that they really are paying attention to. But Sir Thomas Ratham, the man with the obvious American accent, is listed as the diplomat to America. And then the next sentence, he's the American diplomat or the American ambassador to England. Which is it? Those are two very different positions.
Wibbly wobbly.
Right. It came down to, I suspect, RDJ flubbed the line and they didn't catch it in edit and they didn't have him reshoot it. But
Editing does not seem to necessarily be one of the strongest points of the movie, and I think we pointed that out at a few different
right,
times.
visual editing is extremely strong, and
Yes.
the action editing is really good. The continuity editing is a bit sparse, but again, I have to. I keep bringing it up, but I have to keep saying, you don't go to a Guy Ritchie film expect that, you know. So I can't be too mad about it because it's just him doing his job. But
Like you can't go to Michael Bay to expect a political thriller.
whew, yeah, you can't go to Michael Bay film and not expect him to talk about how amazing the U.S. military is. Yeah, exactly.
Well, Eddie, America.
America.
Fuck yeah.
Fuck yeah. So Blackwood is the evil son who's trying to take control of this random cult.
But it is nice to see that we have another secretive cult because they were super prevalent in England and other parts of the world during that time period. So it is nice to see so many other cults pop up and just not the Freemasons
So
or the Masons.
what's funny is
it could be the Masons though.
I don't remember where I saw it, was like a couple years ago, but I did someone argue that the last Jack the Ripper is secretly the result of a cult movie. This is the sequel to that movie. That Holmes came in, threw his way on Three Masons. Turns out it was the wrong cult. Fuck. Let me track down the other guy. Find an actual cult I was supposed to investigate.
That is a take.
That is a take. It's not a good one, but it is funny. But I mean, I again, I kind of dig the cult politics that are happening in this chunk of the movie.
Yeah.
It's a neat idea, and I love Blackwood's both grandiose and extremely specific plans. I'm gonna take control of the empire and then the United States, not the rest of Europe. We'll get to that, but right now, fuck the U.S. We're gonna take them over. Those goddamn colonials. It's like, okay, buddy.
But that's what you have to do in the early 2000s as you're pitching Sherlock Holmes for an American audience.
Right. I have to mention America
to get them even more on Holmes' side. It's like, fuck that guy,
right.
Holmes, take him
right.
down.
He's coming after America. That's bad. We don't like that.
Otherwise, we wouldn't care.
Of the magic tricks that Blackwood does, him causing the guy's gun malfunction and burst of flames is the one I like the most.
Why is that?
Because it was the one that I could halfway see how it was done, but not entirely. So it's I know this is obviously a trick. I can see why people thought this was supernatural, but I can't tell you exactly how it was done, and Holmes explains it later, and that makes sense. Specifically, having the guy drenched in oil and then sparks from the gun. It's like it's a bit glass onion in the sense of we did see all that on the screen, but we didn't know the context of everything we're seeing until later when it was explained, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I did like that because the other ones range from I'm not sure to that's just made up, and we'll get to that's just made up in a minute. But it was a neat touch, and I think my problem is that you introduce Lord Coward as a character and go, oh, I think Blackwood's going to destroy us, and then like 10 minutes later he's like, fuck you, Blackwood's in charge now, and it's like, what happens in that 10 minutes?
Well, because you weren't watching his shoes throughout the entire course of the show, Eddie. And for me, that lets me know that Guy Ritchie watched the Christopher Lee version and noted Christopher Lee Sherlock Holmes saw that dude's shoes and went, shoes.
I mean, it brings up a valid point. Is a lot of people who do Sherlock Holmes media are ultimately fans of Sherlock Holmes and are going to be inspired by vast versions of Sherlock Holmes. Um, I don't know if anyone watched that movie, so I can't say that for sure. But
Guy Ritchie had to, otherwise, or I'm sorry, or the script writer had to, otherwise, how would they know the shoes bit?
that said, I think it's this scene. No, it may have been a slightly earlier scene, where they are going to Baker Street. No, they're going through Baker Street to get to the temple, I believe. And the camera is on the Baker Street sign and then pans down to the street as the carriage goes by. And that is
Yeah.
very intentionally an homage to the opening of the Granada series.
Oh, very nice. All right.
Then we have the bath one, which is pretty wobbly.
Oh God. What if he didn't like to take baths? How long would he have waited to have that happen?
And honestly, like, okay, so the argument is he found a way to have a copper bath and a chemical react, so it would act as a paralytic. And then it's the without leaving a trace. That's not how bathwater works. Right? If it just been he found a way to do it, and then I found a small trace along the edge. And it's the other thing is like when Tom was explaining it, you see him wiping along things while saying not leaving a trace. It's like he obviously did leave a trace because you noticed it.
Oh, there's so many little things, but this movie is without a doubt one of the most watchable pieces of Holmesian media we've seen
Yeah,
so
no,
far.
absolutely. To be perfectly honest, I'm picking it apart because it's fun for me, not because I hate the movie. Right? It's I'm enjoying pulling it apart because otherwise it's going to be an hour and a half of me going, I like this, I like this, I like this. Really, I think that our comments about Jude Law and McAdams are probably the actual genuine problems in the movie.
Yeah,
But the actual mystery is
and I think
whatever.
if they just replaced one of them, it could have still
Yeah,
worked
I
better.
agree.
All right, the dock scene.
Explosions.
Big explosion. Why did we need Adler to be kidnapped, who'd followed them there and caught quickly by Blackwood and put on a burning meat hook? What?
Because
Why?
of reasons. Which again, that's my earlier point. Holmes is going to find Blackwood anyway. This is a completely unnecessary step. Well, now I have to find her because now he has Adler. Okay, but you were going there anyway.
But the thing is, he didn't know he had Edler until she just pops up at the
Right.
last minute, and then we get another creepy Blackwood face scene, which is
Right.
nice.
If he had
But
captured Mary Morstan and Watson's pushing Holmes to go after him, that would have been a
yes,
much stronger connection because then Watson's like, I will fucking murder you, Holmes, if you don't rescue my fiance. That would have been an interesting change, right?
and then it reinforces why Watson would have gone racing after Blackwood so
Right.
quickly to set off the dock explosion. Like Adler slows the movie
Yep.
down because they don't give enough of a character arc for her to
Yeah.
do, other than she has name recognition. So we want her in the Sherlock Holmes movie.
Right.
Anything else before we move on, or otherwise I'll just. Yeah.
Uh, going back to Morstan, on the flip side of this, I do not understand why Morstan went from you're kind of an asshole and I'm gonna throw a drink in your face to please solve the case whatever it takes.
Because we've only got about 50 minutes of the movie
Right.
left, and the next in 30 minutes that has to be an action scene.
Right. Because I mean, logically, if we're following the emotional through lines, she should absolutely blame Holmes for Watson being injured.
Yep.
Her saying Watson would forgive you, it's like that's true, Watson would, but you don't know that. Or if you do know that, you would give a caveat that Watson would forgive you, I won't. Something like that, right?
And do you know how that could have been solved? If she was a person on the hook,
Yeah,
and Holmes saves her, and Watson sets off the explosion trying to catch the bad
right.
guy.
Because then she would have been there
Which,
to be like, I know what you did. So yes, I think I forgive you.
and I saw what Watson does when he's with you. So it reinforces her and Watson's relationship. It builds a relationship with her and Holmes. It lets Holmes sort of offset some of his earlier behavior, and it makes the ending work better when they come
You know
back.
what? Now that we're talking this through, how much money do you want to put that the script was rewritten to include McAdams to add Adler so she could be playing this?
A lot now that you mention it, because Downey Jr. wanted her.
Yeah,
So
I'm going to say, well, she's American, so we can't have her play Morstan. So well, Adler's an American. That makes sense. We'll bring her in. So we'll rewrite some of Morstan's parts to be Adler instead. Yeah, the more we talk about this, the more I think there may have been a rewrite at some point. I feel like the original draft of the script probably had Morstan all the way through.
and so I'm not sure if that movie would have made more money because Rachel McAdams would have brought in money from how famous she was at the
Right,
time. So I would prefer that version that is more
right,
concise. But then again, you have to look at the success of this movie. They obviously knew they were doing here.
right. Yeah.
It's a different world. Um, Holmes studies the ritual does magic of the order and recognizes their symbols in Blackwood's staging of the murders. From this, he deduces that the targets of the final murder are every elected member of parliament. With aid of Lestrade, Holmes fakes his arrest and is taken to see Coward, where he observes evidence of Coward's clothes and issues in deducing that Blackwood has conducted a ceremony in the sewers beneath the Palace of Westminster. Holmes escapes by diving through a window. Holmes, Watson, and Adler find Blackwood's men in the sewers guarding a device based on the experiments of the previous scientists designed to release a cyanide gas into Parliament chamber and kill all but Blackwood supporters, to whom he has secretly given an antidote when they drank from the chalice. Blackwood comes before Parliament and announces their impending deaths, then attempts to activate the cyanide device by remote. Adler is able to deactivate it with the controlled explosion. Coward and Blackwood supporters are apprehended as Blackwood flees Parliament. Holmes chases Adler, who has taken a canister of cyanide from the device, though through the sewers to the top of the incomplete tower bridge, where they are confronted by Blackwood. Blackwood fights Adler and forces her off the bridge into the river, taking the canister from her. He and Holmes then fight. As they later reveal, he has deduced how all of Blackwood's supposed supernatural feats were merely the work of science and trickery. After the scuffle, a nearby piece of equipment collapses, causing Blackwood to be ensnared by chains and hanged as he plummets off the bridge. Adler has landed on the scaffolding platform until Holmes that her employer is, in fact, Professor Moriarty,
What?
and that the professor is not to be underestimated.
So, Chris, do you know how far it is from the Houses of Parliament to the Tower of London?
Absolutely no idea. It's right next door.
2.5 miles, Chris. 2.5 goddamn miles. That's straight.
We've already we've already established Holmes can keep up with their racing. I'm not gonna do it.
No, this is what I like to call Big Ben syndrome, where if you look at comics, particularly comics set in London, written by people who are not live in London, where every time you look out their window, somehow Big Ben is in the background, no matter where you are in London.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of thing. It's like
Well,
all of London is just like 10 seconds from each other.
it's much like in Batman Returns, where they shine the bat symbol, whatever room Michael Keaton's in, the bat light hits in
Yeah,
that room.
exactly. Right. Yes, same thing.
Same architect.
Yeah. uh,
A whole bunch of stuff happens,
right.
Eddie.
We actually kind of covered a lot of this because this is where a lot of the things we've been picking apart kind of where we get that information from. So we have
Yeah,
covered a lot of this. I think the only big thing is Adler doesn't need to be in this final conflict with Blackwood.
but she's in the movie.
Right. She shows up, she says a thing, and then is functionally out of the scene until Blackwood dies, and then she comes back into the scene. Which again, more and more we talk
Yeah,
about, the more I think that feels like it's right around the big confrontation to add Adler into it.
and the whole thing is without her, this would have still worked with just Holmes and Watson
Mm-hmm.
doing what they do,
Right.
because we wouldn't have needed to have Mary here because her part would have already been resolved by Holmes doing this. and the two of them are more than capable of handling what would have transpired
Yeah.
here.
Watson could have done all of this, and it would have made more sense, frankly.
But he is reduced to battling a couple people and pointing a gun at them to get them to go away.
Right. Right. Um, I did when we watched this scene, I was like, "Oh shit, it's another remote detonator." I did not realize when I chose these that was going to be a running plot thread.
It was top of the line. It is science fiction at this point in time, Eddie.
Yeah. No, I actually love that. I actually love the fact that it's the the world could be changed if this technology got out. The fact that Moira didn't want the poison gas, he wanted the remote detonator. I was like, that actually makes sense, primarily because of having watched Leading Lady and then emphasizing how dangerous it was. So it's, okay, no, I actually believe the Moira wants that now.
This is a part of the movie where the like 30 minutes of this shenanigans going around, I realized that I'm an old man.
Okay.
Because I was like, this is going on a long time. This would be better if it was tightened up, maybe like a solid 15 minutes instead of languidly going through all the action and stuff.
I can see that. Certainly, I mentioned before that I kind of just watched all the way through. This is the part where I start checking my watch and realizing, oh crap, it's almost 2 hours. So I agree, this part's a bit slow. Also, the time makes sense. Gas weapons were not invented, were not well known, I should say, until the early 1900s, because World War One used a lot of
Oh, yeah.
chemical weapons.
Yeah.
But the logic of we're going to release cyanide gas into parliaments, and all the people that are with us have drunken this antidote. I'm like, I don't think cyanide gas has a liquidly ingested antidote like that.
But this is where you get the magic in science, aka alchemy, that they use to protect their people.
Right. Right.
Liquid gas mask, if you would.
Honestly, if the thing had been, you are one of the faithful, so when the time comes, you must don this mask to prove your faith. I would have actually bought that much better, right? And then this ornate mask turns out to actually just be a gas mask. I would have bought that more.
I as a cultist though would not have. I would wanted to see the magic that I'd signed up for that I've been promised all this time.
See, that's why I make a bad cultist, Chris, because you ask for things. It's like, I want to sell my soul to you, but before I do, could I have some reassurance that the magic you present is actually accurate?
That is how you do it. You do not drink the Kool-Aid unless you're sure what you're getting
Chris,
at
they
the end of
literally
the day.
drank the Kool-Aid in this movie. That's what saved them from the gas. That never actually happens.
Oh, but I gotta say though, that means that it is good if you're gonna be a cultist, that you're a loyal cultist and you go to every single meeting. What if that's the one meeting your kid was sick, so you stayed home, and then you showed up for the next one, and they go, "Fuck! Look, Charlie's down."
Hey, Bob, what happened last meeting? Oh, I don't know. Blackwood took over. What? I thought he was dead. Yeah, he's alive now, but we drank some wine, and so it's all good. And it's like, oh, do you have any wine left? No, we drank it all. It's good. Okay, well, I'm going to go to Parliament now.
Dead. See?
I kind of want to do now like a short story of random low-ranking cultists just trying to get the cliff notes from what happened in the previous thing. It's like the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead, but like it's for a Cthulhu adventure. So yeah, a bunch of random people. There was like a librarian, a boxer, a woman who was talking about feminism, and some other guy I didn't recognize who had guns. And they came in and they murdered the cultist guy, and then they read a book and they screamed and left. It was super fucking weird.
Did I already tell you, or did you know that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead is my favorite Tom Stoppard play?
No, you actually did not, but I love the movie version of that because it's so much fun about like it is a great movie because it itself is a fun movie, but also it's a good thing of if you actually think about Hamlet for a minute, it's kind of a dumb play. I love the fact that they're not quite insulting the play, but they're kind of poking enough holes in it by doing their stuff. It's like, yeah, this actually doesn't make any sense.
Oh, it's brilliant. Oh, because I read the play before I saw the movie, and that is Tim Roth and Gary Oldman,
Yes.
some of their best work.
Yes, especially when they're on a tennis court. Oh God, I love that scene so much.
Yes. Richard Dreyfuss as a player, though, is still an odd choice. But we're not here to talk
Right.
about that movie because now that may be added to our list of
Yeah,
movies
maybe.
because Eddie's mentioned.
But yeah, so they stop the thing. Again, Adler has a superfluous scene where she blows up the thing, which didn't need to happen. Just write that out if you don't want that. And then they race to Tower Bridge, which I'll also point out, the other thing that pissed me off is at the very beginning when they showed the wide thing of London. Do you want to know what bridge was
Yeah,
completely fixed and built in that shot?
I'm betting it's the
It's
Tower
Tower
Bridge at the very
Bridge.
beginning. Well, it's much like in Toronto, Eddie. The city is always under constant construction, so sometimes you have to tear part of it down to rebuild it. And that's what they did.
Right. Or Vancouver, which is
It
also
was
every
like
city.
87 degrees, and we need a full 90, so let's rip that down and like tweak it a
I
little
gotta
bit.
rebuild it.
All right, Blackwood hangs
Right.
again.
Ironic death.
Yay!
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm jaded, I guess, at this point for that. It may be in 2009, I would have seen it better, but it's
I mean,
um,
I like that scene only for the fact is that we spent the whole movie thinking thinking the possibility was on the table that this is actually magic. Holmes rips apart that it's all chicanery. And then he dies through a fluke, just random happenstance, right? And so someone who preyed so much on people's misreading of coincidence and happenstance and claiming it was magic to then die due to that same kind of happenstance, I thought was more ironic than oh look, he's hanged now because he wasn't hanged before, right? Like the circumstances of it were more ironic than the actual image they had. But otherwise, it did feel a lot like the writer was just really like chuckling. I was like, "Oh, this would be so great," as he's writing that scene. And I've done that before, and I
and
cut those scenes because I know it's self-indulgence.
that's, by the way, folks, if you don't have a good editor, that is why you hire a great editor, because they will point this out to you and stress that you cut it.
Hmm.
Just a FYI. And if now, with the context of you saying the person saying this is a sequel, we're going to say to Murder by Decree for catching the wrong person that wasn't really Jack the Ripper, this would make you think that Holmes has a hanging fetish because that Jack the Ripper character was hung, and now Blackwood is hung here too. So Holmes is obviously a Punisher type of character.
Maybe. Although it does actually make me think that, as well as the Granada series, they may also have, people work on this may also have fans of Murder by Decree, because now that we're talking it through, I am seeing more and more connections to Murder by Decree.
Because it's a great fucking
It
book.
is.
He gives Adler the key to escape after he arrests her.
Sure.
Because reasons.
Reasons.
Sure. Anything else about this before we move on to wrap
Let's
this
wrap this
up?
up.
As Watson moves out of 221B Baker Street, the engaged couple are happy that Holmes has approved their wedding. He's even given them a ring. And Holmes, when they enter the room again, is hanging himself from the ceiling to create the incident to prove that Watson was in fact not a bad doctor, but no one really seems to give a fuck. A police constable comes in and reports to Holmes that a dead officer was found near Blackwood's device. Moriarty used the confrontation with Adler and Blackwood as a diversion while he took the key component based on the science of the radio from the machine. Holmes considers the case reopened. Splash credits.
Okay. Cut to movie 2.
I have no idea how that movie did now that I think about it.
The second movie?
Yeah.
Much worse, if I recall correctly.
Okay. That makes sense. Well, there's not a third one.
Much like with Sherlock, there's constant murmurs that a third one's going to happen. My instinct is that there maybe have been discussions around it, but then as soon as Ritchie got the thing to do his own series, soon afterwards, Robert Downey Jr. takes on the role of Doctor Doom. So it's like, I think it's like maybe I'll stick around and see if you want to. No, we're not doing Sherlock Holmes 3. All right, cool. I'll go over here then.
Well, they couldn't afford RDJ's prices now.
Well, right, maybe another part of it too.
He's won a statue. He's got MCU money. Oh, all right. Mm-hmm. Robert Downey Jr., I'm only going to say this here at the end of our Sherlock Holmes podcast that hasn't been it, should not be fucking Dr. Doom.
Right.
At all. I understand the financial reasons why they wanted to be Dr. Doom as a company. as a fan of Marvel Comics and as someone that enjoys good stories, that should not be the character you have portrayed as
Yep.
to. They can throw enough money at it that maybe they'll make something happen and people like it. But I still disagree with the
Right.
choice. That's it. I said it. I'm
Right.
done.
But um, it's weird. We're at the end of this, and most of the conversation we've had about this movie is how much we were annoyed by it or didn't like it. And yeah, I'm still at the end going, I will still defend this movie, right? I'll still defend it. If people say, I want a good Sherlock Holmes movie that gives me the high points of the character and is fun to watch in 2024, this is pretty high on my list of what I recommend.
I have listed a lot of minor grievances. I have not dragged the movie how I would if I didn't like it.
Right.
I've listed reasons and why I think it could have been better.
Yes.
If people are asking if they need to watch a Sherlock Holmes movie, what would I recommend? Given how people view media now, this would be high on my list of
Yep.
recommends. If you're asking if I like this movie, it's okay.
Yep.
That is my full recommend. It is watchable. I have some intrinsic problems with how things are done and some of the acting choices.
Right.
But then again, I'm just like a TTG RPG freelance writer that doesn't make a lot of money. So what do I know about
Right.
success?
And this that's one thing that's fascinating to me is that this movie could not have been made, I won't say in a year, but certainly about 5 years on either side, 2009, this movie couldn't have been made the way it was.
Nope.
If it had been made earlier, it would have been probably a radically different cast, and frankly, the concept of Sherlock Holmes as an action adventure would not have flown and probably would not have made as much money. And afterwards, probably same thing with casting, but also the shine would have gone off on Sherlock Holmes. This movie is one of the reasons why Sherlock Holmes had a renaissance in media that's still going right now. This movie is a big part of that because no one expected a Sherlock Holmes quite this way by this director with these people on it in this way as a big blockbuster US style summer blockbuster movie. And yet, against all odds, this movie did it and did it well. And has set the tone for Sherlock Holmes media for the next 15 years. For good and bad.
So one of the things I will not point out that we're in the show that I purposely didn't do at the top of the show.
Yeah.
Eddie, do any black people live in 1890s
Nope,
London?
not one. Nobody.
Because I know I watched this movie twice.
Yeah.
And I didn't see anybody.
So
I might have missed someone. It's possible, but I don't think so.
I will say that I said to set a tone over the next 15 years. Part of it is also I always feel like all media is in dialogue with all the media, and so sometimes some of the media's come after this has been to refute some elements of this movie because you're right, it is aggressively white, and there's the idea that well, it's Sherlock Holmes movie, so it has to have white people. That obviously, black people's perception history has been changing pretty strongly in media, not as much as I think either of us would like, but it has been changing, and it's been showing up in other media as well. There is a show coming up that we will talk about that has a black man in a relatively leading role in Sherlockian style things. So we'll get there when we get there.
But my point is, though, this came out in
Right,
2009,
exactly, yeah,
and if people are trying to give it correlation to like Batman Begins had Morgan Freeman like lurking around. There should have been more black people in Gotham, but
right,
still, you had diversity in the
yeah,
cast,
yeah,
and this had zero diversity.
right. And I mean, to be fair, a lot of the media we have hasn't been very diverse. And so I think what's happening here is like, oh look, Sherlock Holmes make money, but the next question of like, in 2009, why is it not more diverse? And I think that's later media starts to address that point. We get things like, for example, Miss Sherlock, which is an all Japanese cast. Um, so the idea that Sherlock Holmes is not a white man in England, but can be
Yeah,
anything, um, starts to really move a bit more. But BBC Sherlock 2008 also aggressively white. So I mean, and
and
I will say,
and I waited until we got to the 2000s for I really
yeah,
put
no,
my
no, no,
credit.
you're
I didn't
absolutely
say
right.
anything about Christopher Lee.
I will say, however, that Elementary has as one of the supporting characters a reoccurring role as a black cop, and has a trans character as a reoccurring guest star, and has another black character show up on a pretty regular basis. So I mean, it's not great, but it is better than the contemporaries at the same time period.
And I'm focusing right now specifically on black people because that is like the story that I can tell and speak
Sure.
to in this instance. But I can say, on the whole, marginalized people because they're not
Right.
in this movie at
Right.
all.
Yeah. And this is one point where I've also pointed back to is like if you go back to the original canon, Doyle maybe did not as diverse as it could have been, and certainly was writing from the perspective of a British white man, but did include marginalized people in his stories more often than we see in the media
Yeah.
that came after it.
Yep. And so that's another point I want to give to Doyle. I don't know. I take it as someone that's read a lot of stories and fiction from different time periods. I take into account the time he wrote it and what he did with it and his views. And that's a century ago from like whenever this movie was made. And they didn't do it for this movie.
Right.
And they had every opportunity. They were handpicking people. They were squeezing them fuckers into roles that they didn't need and generating additional stuff.
Right.
And no one, I'm going to say, thought about adding in any diversity.
Yep.
So this movie for me, on the whole, isn't.
Yeah.
It's
That's
okay.
fair. That's fair. That's fair. I will. I point this out to some people who are like bring this up is like Doyle wrote a story which has some problems, but in the story, Holmes endorses a black man being married to a white woman unambiguously in the 1890s.
Yeah.
Doyle was, given the lens of when he was working from, extremely progressive. And so, yeah, it is frustrating. When, I mean, we dodged around it in the 40s and 50s. 40s and 50s had some rough stuff there.
But we touched
We
on
did.
it in some of the stuff they did
Right.
wrong. But this is a time where we're past 2000s. I'm going to give you a lot more stick. I should be doing it earlier, but I
Yeah.
didn't. I
Yeah.
waited because I wanted to get here to something that was super successful,
Right.
that has Hollywood all over it and highlight all these motherfuckers that didn't do anything or try to do anything.
Right.
And I think the sequel followed the same model.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. I can't tell off in my head because it's been a while since I watched it, but I think you're not wrong. And I'd like to say it gets better, but it's not going to get that much
That
better as we go through.
to that to give a spoiler, I'll go ahead. And if someone asks me what's a Sherlock movie they should watch, I will tell them to go watch Enola Holmes.
Right. Sure.
That's it. I'm done. That's my final thought on this whole movie. Go watch Enola Holmes.
Um, I mean, I only reason why I wouldn't recommend Enola Holmes unambiguously is just because it's not technically a Sherlock movie. But yes, I know what you mean.
Sherlock's in it.
And we will talk about that when we get there.
Eddie, if people are looking to contact you online to agree with you and refute me,
Well, before we get to that, we have to talk about what we're going to do about next week.
Enola Holmes, right?
No, we're not talking about Enola Holmes. We still have a whole decade to get through.
What?
No, Holmes is 2020s.
What?
No, we have a whole 2010s to get through.
Oh, we're going to cover the Benedict Cumberbatch Hounds of Baskerville movie next
No,
week.
we are not. That thing could die in a fire. No, we're talking about actually one of my actual genuine favorite Sherlock Holmes films. Is Ian McKellen's Mr. Holmes. That was in 2015. Where we saw a version of Sherlock Holmes in his elderly years and how that could go badly. We're going to look at another version of that is much more interesting, and is some more diversity in it. So there you go.
Now that we've got that in
Right
mind,
now, if people want to
Eddie,
tell me that my opinions are correct and they should agree with me on all things, they can find me on my website, which is Pug Steady, pug like a dog, steady like how you walk. And you find me there also on Blue Sky. I think that's kind of settled into being my social media of choice for professional stuff. We'll see how the ongoing wars continue. But really, if you want to talk to me, you probably should talk to me on the Darker Hue Discord, where right now I'm just baffled at how many Picard memes you have access to, because there are so many.
So for some reason though, people love making the Picard memes over the Deep Space Nine memes with Cisco or anyone else. So that is why they're so easy to find. I spend a lot of my time when I should be writing to think, tr- going through various internet rabbit holes, finding things to let save to then later populate other
Right.
things. Eddie is used to me sending him random YouTube things. We talked about it before
Yes.
recording. Ooh, look how cool this is. Some of them are shows, and Eddie's like, "Fuck, is he gonna really want to talk about that?" And some of them are like, "Oh my god, you found that thing." So it's
Yeah, it's
50-50.
hit or miss.
Um, if you are looking to find me, you should come into the Dark Room Discord. Hey, Eddie, I think we should put a Discord link in the notes going
No,
forward.
no, I refuse.
So that way people can hop on and they can really talk to us about whatever episode they jumped
If
on.
you give me a link, I'll put it in the notes.
Sign up for y'all. Otherwise, you can buy my stuff from darkrewstudios.com website. You could also buy Harlem Unbound second edition, hopefully at your friendly local gaming store. If they don't have Harlem Unbound or Haunted West, you should tell them to go up, add them to your gaming store.
Excellent. So with that, we'll see you next week when we talk about certain.
Go see Enola Holmes.